So that's our housekeeping here for today. And now we will go ahead and start with the work at hand and with what we want to accomplish. I'm Debra Pozega Osburn. I'm Vice President, University Relations at the University of Saskatchewan, as well as a member of the Board of Directors of the United Way Centraide of Canada. And first thing I want to do is thank you for being here on this good day. We have well over 100 people in this discussion right now, and more are signing in even as we begin it. So it's just a pleasure to have all of you here today. And I am really delighted to be asked to be your MC today. I have been involved with United Way in one way or another for most of my adult life as a donor, as a director, as a volunteer. It's an organization I really believe in, and I love to support, and that I see making a difference in our community. So again, delighted to be with you today and to be playing this role. And it's also, as we get started, a privilege for me to acknowledge that we are here today even though we're meeting virtually, we are all placed on and physically standing on, very respectfully, Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. And I'd invite each of you to acknowledge that in your own way, wherever it is that you're tapping into this meeting. Really happy, as are my colleagues at United Way, to see that you've been able to join us today virtually in a platform in a way that I think we're getting used to, but still feels, I think, unnatural to a lot of us. We're used to being together. We're used to gathering together. So it feels a little bit awkward for many of us to be in a platform like this. We have all had to adjust. All of you in this meeting and this discussion with us, and all of the folks at United Way have had to adjust and adapt and change rapidly to keep doing the good work that we are doing in our community. I know some of us are struggling. Some of you on this call are struggling. You're struggling in different ways that feel very personal to you. And I think many of us feel too as if we are under some enormous pressure. And what I want to remind you, I guess, as I say, there's well over 100 of us on the call. We're not alone. If we're feeling like somehow we're alone, we really are not. The pressure we're feeling, our burdens become lighter when we share them. So I would invite all of us to reach out to each other if we're feeling that pressure these days. We are living in a time of uncertainty. There's no doubt about that. We're living in a challenging time. Long-standing issues in our communities have suddenly become much more starkly visible. A much brighter light is shone on these long-standing issues in our communities, and we need to recognize that they've become starkly visible, and I think they feel intensely urgent. About 2 years ago, United Way Centraide Canada undertook a project. It was sort of a communication and drawing together of the community around a brand campaign that was designed to show that bright light on what we called unignorable issues in our communities. And through that work, we identified at that time a number of unignorable issues, and I'll list them for you. They were and are poverty, social isolation, homelessness, youth employment, domestic violence, hunger, education inequality, and mental health. These were and are and remain unignorable issues in our communities. Well, over the past few weeks, we've been reminded of another unignorable issue in our communities, and that is racism, systemic racism. It's an unignorable issue that needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be addressed. It's really an important moment in time for all of us, as an organization, as a society, and as individuals. We are dedicated to building better communities. That's why we're gathered in this space. That's why we're on this call. We're dedicated to building strong communities. And if that is the case, we need to listen, and we need to learn, and we need to challenge ourselves and each other around this really critical issue. And we have to agree that we're going to work toward undoing these devastating effects of systemic racism in our communities. And we have to acknowledge and become aware of our own biases. That's hard work, but I know we're up to that challenge, and I know we're committed to it. I think another thing too, the events of the past few weeks remind us, is that systemic racism is actually a form of violence. It attacks directly and physically, and that's the most obvious way, but it also attacks the very idea of equality and opportunity. And we see those effects, the effects of that racism every day, and many of us feel it every day. And we see that through the racialization of poverty that has taken hold over generations, and in our health and wellness, the disproportionate impact, for example, of COVID-19 on Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities. It's important, and we would be remiss if we did not address that a bit today. Now, United Way's vision for our communities is where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. Everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. We strive to eradicate poverty and social exclusion. We bring people together. We create opportunities for people like us to show our love for our community. And we invest in these essential services that sort of help that play out in a visible way and help bridge that gap between potential and opportunity. We're committed to diversity as a core value, as an organization and as individuals. And we know we've got a lot of work to do in this space. And we are committed to doing that work so that we can ensure we're in an inclusive world, that we're learning with and for and alongside our communities and from each other, and that United Way staff and volunteers reflect the community we live in and love. And we live in this community and we love this community. That's why we're here, and that's why we're on this meeting today. We're committed to doing this work and continuing this work today and tomorrow and far into the future. So thank you for that moment to make these remarks. Now, for today, this year marks the 13th anniversary of United Way's Women Leading the Way event. And I have been at a number of these events and have enjoyed them immensely. Some of you have been at all of them. It's evolved over the years, starting with a small group of 25 women gathering over lunch to celebrate women's role in philanthropy. Last year, more than 200 women gathered on the banks of the South Saskatchewan River at the beautiful Ramey Modern, which is, again, just a gem in our community. And at that meeting, they were inspired to take action and show their local love. Now, COVID-19 has, of course, forced us to adapt and do things in a different way. So we're not all gathered on the banks of the river this year. We cannot be, but I want to thank you for journeying with us on this sort of new way and gathering together as best we can to say, as we have been saying, united apart. I'm really happy we can continue this tradition of gathering, even in this unusual way, to celebrate the unique leadership role that women play in our communities. And if you're spreading some of the local love over social media about this event today, please use the hashtags, and you'll see them you'll see the social media hashtags up here. You'll see WLTW 2020, United Apart, and then you'll see the others, other ways to connect on Facebook and on Instagram. So do share your local love today and talk about what we're talking about today in whatever way feels comfortable to you. And just another quick note, as I thank you for being all here with us today, all of you are entered into a virtual door prize. That'll be drawn at the conclusion of today's event, so stay tuned on that, and we'll see how all of that goes. Now, over the past several weeks, we've seen this renewed emphasis on the importance of connection and community from many different sectors. Today, we're going to hear from 3 female panelists who will explore how mental health and resilience have a direct impact on the unignorable community issues that we've been talking about: poverty, hunger, homelessness, social isolation, these unignorable issues, and domestic violence and other sorts of violence that are characterizing our communities. Now, I think you're going to be inspired by their stories and their thoughts. And as was mentioned earlier, we are hoping as we move through our discussion today that we have some time to answer questions at the end. So do put your questions into the Q&A function, and we'll bring them forward as we get closer to the end of our talk. Now, just to get us warmed up, before we begin talking with our panelists, I'd like to invite everyone to participate in a quick poll. In the chat box on your screen, you'll see a link to the slido.com website. Click on that link, it'll take you where you need to go. Then enter the event code, which is WLTW. And then you should see the polling question right there. The question is, in one word, describe how you're feeling when you think about our community as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Describe how you're feeling in one word. Don't overthink it. Just go with your gut reaction. That's always the best way for us to figure out how we're feeling. And I'll give you a couple minutes. I'll give you about a minute to complete this poll. We'll see how the answers come in. Wow, look at that. So I have to say, every single word on here, every single feeling that is expressed here, I have felt this at some point in these last few weeks. How beautiful is it that as we are anxious, uncertain, and overwhelmed, we are also so hopeful. It's beautiful. And I think you will see in our discussion today, this notion that we can be overwhelmed, uncertain, anxious, scared, but also largely hopeful. I think you'll see that play out a bit today. And what we're going to do today is we're going to inspire you to be intentional. What our speakers are going to do today is inspire you to be intentional in how you stay connected and address some of the feelings that you've put here today. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you today's panelists and the reason that you've come here today to hear their stories and their great ideas. We'll start with Elise Cruz. Elise, you can give yourself a wave there. Elise is a recent graduate of the University of Saskatchewan College of Law. And prior to entering law school, she worked as a degreed engineer, primarily in the mining and water sector industries. And what you'll hear from her today is regarding an initiative that she and a colleague have recently launched, which is an innovative community response for children in this time of COVID-19. Then we have Andrea Howe. Andrea, she's the Associate Director, Labor Partnership and Interim Director, Community Impact at United Way of Saskatoon and area. Andrea's current work involves connecting community organizations with resources to help vulnerable individuals in our community during the pandemic. She too has a powerful story to tell. And then Deandra Bailey. She is the Chief Brand Officer for Lucky Bastard Distillers, and there she leads their involvement in the community, and you will know that they are highly visible in the community, so it's work well done. She leads the work for their involvement in the community, and she too has been involved in an innovative community-centric thinking, a number of initiatives in response to this crisis. Each of these women were invited today because they each have a unique perspective, and you've heard a little bit about their unique backgrounds on creating connections in community during this global pandemic. So to get started, I'm going to ask each of you three to share your story of how your organization has created new connections in the community during COVID-19, and I would like to start with Deandra.
Hi, Deb. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on the panel. So as Deb mentioned, I work for Lucky Bastard Distillers. We're a micro distillery in Saskatoon. We're really fortunate. We have a company culture that allows our staff to be generous in their thinking. So we're always looking for ways to get involved in the community and to help out. Early on during COVID-19, as it was hitting Canada, we had discussed possibly manufacturing hand sanitizer. And then as we realized there was going to be a shortage in Saskatchewan, we decided to get to work. The tricky part about making hand sanitizer isn't the actual process, it's just the sourcing of the ingredients. So due to the sourcing issues, price gouging that was taking place, and the hoarding, we decided that our main goal was going to be to provide sanitizer to first responders. We chose first responders because they often don't have access to soap and water during their shifts. And we wanted to make sure that they were, they're taking care of us, so we wanted to take care of them. Early on, we partnered with Stumbletown Distilling, which is also a Saskatoon distillery here. And Saskatchewan Blue Cross stepped up as well, so which was great. We were able to increase our goal from 5,000 liters of sanitizer actually to 8,000. So it was a nice increase with help from them. We dedicated about 7 staff full-time for about a month just to handling inquiries and dealing with distribution. So from March 19th to April 17th, we were able to give out over 8,000 liters of hand sanitizer to people all over Saskatchewan, including a little bit into Alberta and Manitoba as well.
Boy, that's remarkable. Just a remarkable story. I have to say, we were as we've been preparing for this, I have been bemoaning the fact that we can't burst into applause at this moment and recognize that good work. But 8,000 liters, that's remarkable, and surely has made a difference for those first responders, and we thank you for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through the rest of the questions we have. But now I'd like to turn to Elise and ask you if you wouldn't mind sharing your story of how you and your colleagues have created these new connections in the community during this pandemic.
Hi, Deb. Thanks a lot for that introduction. As mentioned, my name's Elise Cruz, and I'm a recent graduate of the College of Law. And my roommate, Courtney Catlin, was actually the first person who was tested for COVID on the U of S campus at their medical center. And so Courtney and I went into isolation quite quickly into the kind of the COVID pandemic within Canada, as we were worried that she might have it. And then, as I'm sure lots of people did, we spent the first several days of isolation spending way too much time on the internet. And as we saw our communities kind of shut down, schools shutter, sort of things like that close their doors, we saw lots of funny memes on Twitter and Instagram about how once parents were faced with childcare duties and homeschooling duties 24/7, they all thought that teachers should make a lot more money than teachers probably did. And while it's a bit of a funny anecdote, that got Courtney and I thinking, if our very well connected, very well resourced circles were already annoyed with homeschooling, how were the members of our community doing who maybe didn't have those resources to begin with, who were maybe starting to face some financial difficulties due to job loss? And so once we found out that Courtney didn't have COVID, her and I started a group called YFC Community Response for Kids. And along with lots of other law students who donated their time, we started a program that took in donations, both monetary and toy donations, and then put together care packages for children in our community who might not have a lot of activities at home and whose parents might be struggling to be able to afford those right now. So the intent behind that was both to put some smiles on some kids' faces who maybe haven't seen new toys in a while, but also to give parents who were undoubtedly facing a lot of stress at that time a little bit of a reprieve. We really focused on art supplies and games and toys that children could engage with on their own, depending on their age, so that parents could maybe have a few moments to themselves, which I think was a little bit limited during this pandemic.
Well, that another remarkable story, and again, just a story about what two people with a great idea can do to make a difference. And so how has the reach then been of the program?
Mm-hmm. So we ran the program for, I would say, just about a month and a half. And during that time, we managed to deliver toys and packages to over 550 children.
All right, can we get a virtual applause there? Because that is really remarkable. It's really great. And I have to say, I come from a long line of teachers. My father was a high school teacher. My mother was a grade 3 teacher. My sister still is a special education teacher. So I understand the importance of the work and getting it right, but also the additional stress that comes, when dealing with young people, children in particular, in these times. So thank you for that, and thanks for sharing that story, and we'll have a chance to get a little bit further into that too as our discussion goes on. And now I'd like to turn to you, Andrea. if you wouldn't mind, again, just sharing that story of how the organization has created these connections in the community during a pandemic when we've had to stay united apart.
Thanks, Deb, and welcome everybody. It's nice to be involved on this panel. So during this time, United Way has connected and reconnected with many individuals, agencies, and organizations in various ways. We joined with the Saskatoon Community Foundation to establish the Saskatoon COVID-19 Community Response Fund to help those who need it the most during this challenging time. We connected and reconnected with many through our participation on the Saskatoon Interagency Response to COVID-19 team. We and other United Ways connected with the federal government via United Way Centraide Canada, twice now actually, to assist with dispersing emergency funds and government funds in 2 different areas. So we responded to urgent immediate needs of seniors impacted by COVID through the COVID Seniors Response Fund. And United Way Centraide is one of the 3 national intermediaries tasked with investing $350 million across Canada through the Emergency Community Support Fund. And the purpose of this fund is intended to strengthen the capacity of service organizations to meet the needs of those who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So our United Way is currently in the process of allotting our share of the funds to Saskatoon and area. And we received additional funding for Central and Northern Saskatchewan, which is outside our traditional funding area. So we have made many connections because of this. And in fact, one of our new connections is actually assisting us with our adjudication process. So ultimately, these new and renewed relationships have assisted United Way to establish connection and provide support to those in need in our community and beyond.
Well, that's what a great story too about, I know a lot of people, a lot of organizations are using the word pivot now, right? And they're saying, well, we were doing this, but we've had to pivot that. And we've heard a couple of stories already coming up to yours. Did you find, Andrea, that people understood that United Way could be a resource for them at a time like this when they might not usually have thought of you because of this outreach and connection?
I think there was a realization that United Way are a movement across the country. We know our communities well, and we're able to provide that immediate support and quickly in a quick turnaround time. We were able to deploy those funds that we were provided.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I have to say, again, working at the national level with United Way, sometimes you think about organizations like this as not being able to turn on a dime, and we all turned on a dime. We just were able to do it as an organization and as people within the organization. So I want to thank you for that. I'm going to move into a set of questions now, and again, we'll keep moderating the Q&A to see if any of you have other questions you want to ask. And I'm going to start with Allyse, and I want you, Allyse, sort of thinking into the future and thinking about sort of the lessons learned. So how has your thinking changed? What in fact are those lessons learned since you've had this experience? You've identified the needs, you've taken an action on it, you've moved forward. The pandemic we're recovering. What are the lessons learned for you?
I guess kind of top of mind are 2 lessons. And the first is, you spoke earlier about, being intentional with our actions. And I guess I would say that it's really important to be deliberate about who you surround yourself. And what I mean by that is, this pandemic started and everyone went into isolation, and it was finals for a lot of law students. And a lot of law students, top of mind was not community involvement. And that's not a passing of judgment on them. Some were faced with new childcare burdens. Some were facing anxieties about, a new form of examination. But what I thought was very important at that time was, how can I help my community? And I was really lucky in that was reflected in a lot of my friends who I had surrounded myself with. Mine and Courtney's organization, YXE Community Response for Kids, which I see a question has come in that it's no longer running. Yeah, it's not. We ran it while we were in Saskatoon and then shut it down as we've moved. But the reason we were able to run it is because we had friends who were willing to help us and jump on board and volunteer. And that might not have been possible if my peer group had been different. So that's, I think, one really important lesson is to make sure that the people you surround yourself with reflect the values that you do. And then I think another important point specifically for me was to not wait for perfection to start helping your community. Courtney and I started with $30 in donation and a few toys from my cousin that he could part with, and just a Facebook post saying, hey, if anyone out there knows of some families in need, send them your way and we'll figure it out as we go. If we had waited for funding and waited for an organizational structure to kind of shake out, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere, because by the time that had been organized, it would have been time for us to leave the city. And so we talked about companies being, I think you said, talking about pivoting, but I think it's important for us to recognize our own ability to be agile, and that you can start with your good idea and, you know, take off running and know and believe in your own ability to pivot and be agile as you face adversity. And, you know, worst case scenario, you take off running with your idea and you help a few people, and then you aren't able to help anymore. But that's kind of what Courtney and I said, you know, if we help 10 kids, great. But it turned into something a lot bigger because we got started.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it reminds you of, I think it was the tennis player Arthur Ashe who said, start where you are, use what you can, use what you have and do what you can, right? And you had an impact, I'm sure. I'm going to take the same question here to Andrea, if I may. Andrea, this is a question about lessons learned. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about lessons learned from your perspective.
So I've learned that Zoom and Microsoft Teams and WebEx are extremely beneficial platforms, as you indicated, Deb, as we navigate and readjust the way that we may have traditionally worked or connected with others. I hope, though, that it won't become the new norm. I've learned via all the Zoom meetings and working remotely from home that I really believe that the water cooler chatting and the pre and post-meeting face-to-face interactions are so valuable in developing new and deepening existing relationships. And this is coming from me, who could easily become a recluse and like it. So I've also learned through this time that free access to internet should maybe be considered as an essential service. Many of us had little or no difficulty adjusting to our new virtual platforms and reality. However, many had difficulty. Children and families who can't afford devices or internet to continue their schoolwork, those who are isolated and just trying to connect with a loved one or a human face, and individuals and families who are attempting to connect with programs and services and unable to do so. And I've learned, well, I really didn't learn, but I relearned that Saskatoon is a community full of amazing individuals who, in the midst of all this uncertainty, immediately joined the efforts in assisting our family, our friends, our neighbors, and others who needed help. And I look at individuals like Elise and Deandra, individuals and agencies who had pivoted their work and came together to assist those in need. Individuals, unions, organizations, and businesses who donated time and money to respond to COVID's challenges we're facing. And many, like my colleagues, and probably a number of you in the audience, in our virtual audience, that are juggling their work and juggling working remotely from home, attempting to keep children entertained or going to school, mourning possibly the loss of a loved one, caring about not being able to see somebody that they care about. And through this, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that we really need to ensure that we're taking care of our coworkers, our family, our friends, and ourselves, as well as the important job of taking care of the most vulnerable in our community.
Absolutely. Very wise words, Andrea. Thank you very much for that. I guess, Deandra, I'd like to hear you again, your different background, different mindset, different project. What were your lessons learned?
Yeah, on a negative note, I guess, I learned that there's no such thing as a sure bet. So we have a retail location that's in the Saskatoon airport, and it is supposed to be open 365 days a year. So never thought it would ever be shut down or negatively affected. And yeah, we had to come to a full stop as passenger counts have severely declined at the airport. So that was kind of a lesson that you can't have a sure bet. But on a positive note, I learned that we have an amazing ability as a company to be creative and to adapt. We added a whole new division to our company in less than a month, and we were able to maintain our production of our regularly consumed products. And I think it just gave everyone a confidence. Like, everyone was walking around here feeling really good that, you know, we're very capable and creative, and just gives you that confidence that you need.
Yeah. So even though everything doesn't go the way you think it will, there actually is a path.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we're going to bump back to Andrea here. Andrea, if we may, you know, I think in your role, obviously, you're all about supporting and making sure that we're in a healthy community. How are you? We're moving now into recovery. I think that doesn't mean we're out of the woods by any means, but we are moving into recovery. How do you imagine continuing to provide this kind of support as we move into recovery mode?
I think what we need to recognize first is that not all individuals, agencies, workplace, and organizations can even look at shifting to recovery, and some may not recover at all. Many will continue to experience the impacts of COVID for quite some time. I had the pleasure of participating in, another Zoom presentation featuring Kevin Cameron, who's the Executive Director of the North American Center for Threat Assessment and Trauma Response. And one of his comments has really stuck with me. He said, "Your crisis isn't necessarily my crisis." And he continued saying that we need to remember that many have lived in crisis for so long that COVID is not necessarily a big deal to them. So as some of us shift into recovery, many will continue to worry about finding a safe place to sleep. Many will worry about where they can go for a free meal, or how to get there if they have no bus money and live far away. This is a reality for many pre-COVID, and it definitely heightened during COVID, and will be an issue post-COVID, even after a vaccine makes COVID a pandemic of the past. So recovery for United Way is we will just continue doing the work that we've always done. I know our fundraising team is already planning for the 2020 campaign and what that will look like. So be prepared. We will be coming to a workplace near you. And with the help of you and our donors and our partners and our volunteers, we're going to continue to support community services and agencies as they restabilize and as they possibly adjust their way of providing services to their clients. We will actively participate on community tables regarding various issues and emerging trends. And we will continue our joint work with our labor partners and other partners, and continue our involvement with 211 Saskatchewan, Journey Home, and Summer Success Literacy Camps.
Marvelous, marvelous. Thanks for that recap, and we'll talk a little bit more maybe about the needs of the community that can be supported in a little bit. Deandra, have you had a chance to think about this sort of recovery mode? What it means to sort of move now? Thanks for sharing your experience about the way things didn't go exactly perfect, but now you're moving forward. How does this recovery look to you in terms of keeping going forward?
Yeah, in terms of our airport location, we're just going to wait things out. The airport authority will give us the go-ahead when things have picked up. So that hasn't been too concerning. And in terms of our sanitizer, we are still committed to providing first responders with sanitizers. So should there be a second wave and another shortage in stores, we're ready to step up and provide sanitizer for them. We've also reached out to the Sask Health Authority, and we are committed to them as well, that should any of their supply chain get interrupted, that we could step in and assist them as best we can. So yeah, things have slowed down for the sanitizer, which is a good thing, but we're prepared if things were to kind of escalate again.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And Elise, you've already talked a little bit maybe about sort of what's ahead, but when you think about recovery, if it's not exactly what you were doing before, what you and your colleague were doing before, what does this recovery path look like to you?
Yeah, that's such a good point, Deborah. I'm in a bit of a different circumstance than our other panelists, as I was just, a person with a friend running a program during COVID, and that's now kind of shuttered as we've both transitioned away from Saskatoon. But you talked about at the beginning of this panel, doing hard work on ourselves. And as I'm in this kind of transition period where I don't necessarily have the connections in Regina to know where I want to volunteer, although if any of our attendees have any ideas for me, I'm all ears. But I think it's important for us to remember that we don't need to be actively volunteering at this exact time in order to be, being a good citizen and a good community member. So right now, what I'm really doing is focusing on, better educating myself on what I want allyship to look like for myself moving forward, and educating myself on perhaps some of the issues that I have been undereducated on in the past. I think it's important to recognize that myself and Deandra and Andrea are on this panel because we did something very visible, and visible things are nice, but what we're hearing, I think, from a lot of marginalized communities right now is that what white individuals such as myself should maybe spend a bit more time doing is some invisible work at home. Education, reading, just having conversations within our own social circles, and that could be really transformative because of issues like systemic racism. So in my kind of strange transition phase between Saskatoon and Regina and starting a new job, I'm trying to focus on that.
Yeah, wow, what a powerful story, and thank you for being willing to stand up and challenge yourself, and to understand that while we're all looking outward, we need to look inward too. That's really important, and thanks for that. I have one more question. There are a couple questions coming in on the chat. I have one more question for each of the panelists, and then we will get more specifically to some of the questions coming in on the Q&A. And this is something I think about a lot. So nobody asked for this pandemic, right? Nobody wants to be in this situation, but we've all seen and learned some things we would have never seen or learned because of it. So I'm going to start, Deandra, with you and ask you, what are the lasting changes you'd like to see now that we've seen what we've seen and we know what we know from the pandemic?
Yeah, so I also come from a long line of educators. So mine's actually to do with teaching. So I've been hearing from community members about how difficult it's been to be home and teaching your kids, and what a difficult job teachers have. So I really hope that in the fall, that when hopefully things resume and kids are back in school, that parents will not only remember that appreciation, but also advocate for teachers. I feel like the teachers are always, they have to advocate for themselves, but I think parents need to get in there and advocate for teachers as well. So I just hope that they, keep that appreciation going into the fall.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And that would be lasting change for sure, if that happened. Elise, when you think, again, you're at a sort of different point in your career for sure, and really exploring a lot of options. When you think about lasting changes, now that we've seen what we've seen and we know what we know, what lasting change would you like to see?
So I think I'll give kind of a two-part answer to that. I think in relation to the COVID situation that's very specific, the lasting change I'd like to see is public's desire to see experts front and center of our policy. As a former engineer, I think it's been amazing to see individuals like Dr. Bonnie Henry, Dr. Shahab in Saskatchewan. I think it's been amazing to see them giving press releases every single day at a certain time, and having the public tune in to not just what politicians are saying, but what our public health experts are saying. And I would love to see that continue in a lot of other facets. I think there's some great social science and great policy experts and great experts at the University of Saskatchewan and Regina who could really speak to how Saskatchewan could make some very informed policy decisions moving forward. And so I hope that the public demands that of our politicians, that we demand that experts are forefront and center of shaping where our province can go. And then I think in relation to kind of the racial tensions that have arisen and the movement towards Black Lives Matter and all of those protests that have been going on, and one of the comments that has been made about, you know, white privilege and diversity, I also hope that that remains at the forefront of everyone's mind moving forward. I think for too long, there's been a lot of lip service paid to issues such as those. And I hope that this moment in our point in time is actually the tipping point that we need in Canada to recognize some of our very, very racially biased systems.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said earlier, this is a moment in time, right? And we can take this moment and react and respond and move forward in a really powerful way. And I think we have to. So thank you very much for that. Andrea, I don't think we've asked you about the lasting change yet. So why don't you address that? And then we'll move into some of the questions and comments and a few of the other things we need to talk about today. So over to you.
So there's a number of things that I hope for. I hope even after COVID that we can continue to recognize and value the importance of those who became essential workers and frontline workers, and remember their courage during this. Like those who provide immediate supports and services through our community agencies and interagency response team. Those like my son who drive semi to deliver food all across the province. Those who work in grocery and retail stores, allowing us to be able to purchase food and other items. And of course, our healthcare professionals and workers, and that includes environmental service workers, nutrition workers, nurses, lab techs, and the whole bit. I don't think it's unfair to say that COVID has highlighted areas that require improvement in our social safety net. My hope is that society will focus on strengthening these areas. And I'm hoping this sense of urgency and focus on what Deb referred to before as United Way calls unignorable issues, that they will remain a priority for change. So issues like domestic violence, and we know that this pandemic has exacerbated the violence against women and children as they are trapped at home and can't access or seek safety. We know that at least 10 women in Canada have been killed since the pandemic started. And of course, we know that that horrific shooting spree in Nova Scotia began as a domestic violence incident. Other issues like homelessness, food security, and another unignorable issue that Deb referred to was racism, which continues to rear its ugly head. I hope that we can continue to understand the value of supporting and shopping local, even if we can purchase it cheaper online. The strength, like shopping local and supporting local, I believe strengthens our community infrastructure and aids our community to thrive. That's the lasting change I want to see. And lastly, I hope we will continue as a community to collaborate and partner to continue the important work of trying to solve the root causes of social issues. I truly believe that building solidarity and strength is a key component in creating this lasting change in our community.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that really thoughtful response, Andrea. And I want to thank all of you for being willing to come forward today and sort of put your genuine self out in front of this platform. We have, the last I knew, probably about 150 people now in this discussion, and I think that's, again, really indicative of the respect that our community has for the three of you and their interest in your story. I have a couple, I'm just going to keep you sort of active in this conversation here for a few more minutes, because we do have a couple of questions here that I think any or all of you could ask. There are a couple that have been brought forward about related specifically to our role in the community as philanthropists. And one of them is acknowledging the importance of donor support in responding in a situation like this, where, no matter how good of systems and structures we have in place, there is a need for additional support in a situation like this. So one question would be, what would each of you say to those in the session today is needed in the way of this kind of support going forward? So what sort of thing is needed? What sort of support? What kinds of support? And the other is related to specific examples of those interagency collaborations that, Andrea, you had referred to earlier, particularly when the federal funding was made available to be distributed by communities within communities. So two questions related to philanthropy. Elise, you were sort of in a position of needing to go out and find that support for your project. Maybe you could answer first, then we'll go quickly to Andrea, and as the two of you were most involved in that area.
Yeah, and I cannot begin to talk about how important it was to have donations, monetary and otherwise, of course. We were very lucky in that quite quickly, someone who is within the philanthropy community in Saskatoon donated $500 to us right off the bat. And then we were also directed towards the Rising Youth program, which is put on by the Government of Canada and the Service Corps of Canada, which got us a $1,500 grant. But I guess, funding aside, I think that what's really important to recognize is that everyone has something to give. I don't want audience members who say, well, I don't have an extra $500 sitting around right now. Does that mean I don't have, value to contribute to philanthropy? It's so important to recognize that time is also needed, and emotional support is needed. We appreciated when people said, I have one board game to donate. Can I do that? It's really important to recognize that as a community, if we all just thought about what we could give a little bit more, I think things would be better. You might not have $500, but you might have had a board game, or you might have just had the ability to send us a message on Facebook saying, I appreciate what you're doing, and kind of giving us a boost to keep going during some of our harder times.
Thank you very much. Andrea, is there anything that you can add there? There was a question specifically about those that interagency collaboration, if you have an example or two of that.
The interagency collaboration is with regards to donors and funding. We received through our channel, and this is separate from the Saskatoon Community Foundation, close to, I think it's around $85,000 so far. And we've invested a lot of that into frontline services and agencies who are continuing to provide support to individuals and the most vulnerable in our city. So I agree wholeheartedly with Elise about the fact that there's more that individuals can do besides providing monetary donations. All those things are important. But we also know that donations of money are a way that we can support our community agencies and especially during this time when agencies haven't been able to fundraise as they typically have in the past. We know that donations, we're going to possibly struggle with donations because people have been really impacted. They've lost their jobs. They might not be able to give as much. So it's kind of a hypocritical situation. When our community is struggling the most, that's when we need the most from individuals to help support those that are most vulnerable.
Well, thank you very much for that. You know, we've got a number of questions here. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we do have one that's been brought forward about our ability to serve our northern communities. And you know, there are many reasons that I think our northern communities have not been served well, even in an overall response. And there are certainly links to systemic racism in this response or lack of response. There are other sorts of initiatives and characteristics that play into that. But if we could any of the panelists sort of address this notion of how essential services would not have been available in northern communities even when needed during a pandemic response, and even when we had systems in place that we thought were serving our communities well. So we could do a whole separate panel discussion on that, frankly, but I think it's an important question and I don't want it to go unaddressed today.
Yeah, if I could maybe speak to that, Kaylee, I think you've brought up a really good point. Quite early on in community, YXC community response for kids, we received a call from a First Nations up in northern Saskatchewan, which I won't name, but saying right now what has happened is we're shuttered into our community and we can't get any supplies for children up here. We have no ability to get diapers. We have no ability to get formula necessarily even. And if we leave the community, we're not going to be allowed back in. And so we, despite the fact that our mandate was quite specifically Saskatoon, we actually reached out to the Indigenous Law Students Association, ILSA, and managed to get $500 worth of diapers up to northern Saskatchewan, which I think sounds like a great story, but what is the important part is that we shouldn't have ever been called upon to do that. It shouldn't be up to two law students who really have no connections that we can rely upon to kind of put together a Band-Aid solution to ensure that children in northern Saskatchewan can have access to diapers. So I think you really hit on something important, Kaylee, and that is that it was very different for people in northern Saskatchewan, and the struggles that they faced were not comparable to those in Saskatoon and weren't necessarily looked at properly by those of us who weren't facing the same struggles.
So I really want to thank you for that, Elise. You know, I think so all three of our panelists and myself are in positions where we can have conversations like the one that's been raised here at various points in our community, and it's our ability and our willingness to have those conversations, I think, that can begin to change things, as well as the willingness and the ability of everybody in this virtual room. So this point that's being raised, that's a question every one of us can ask somebody else today. Why does this happen? Why does it keep happening? And why won't it change? And I think every person in this room, our willingness to answer that question, I think, is going to be critical. You know, we have a number of other questions here, and I'm wondering if maybe one of the things we could do, if my colleagues and I could gather for a few minutes after this and figure out if there's a way that we can address these questions directly in a different way, in a different format, to be sure that they get answers. And because I appreciate all of them coming forward, but we are running short on time, and people are going to need to leave this call. So I first of all, I want to say, like, if you're in a place where you can give a round of applause and not feel too self-conscious about it to our three panelists here, I really hope that you can do that. It's been delightful to have you here. We could easily have spent another half hour together with these important questions and discussions, so I want to really thank you for being here. This sort of event, of course, is never possible without a dedicated group of volunteers who help not only envision an event, but in this case, re-envision an event in a virtual way. And I just want to give a quick shout out to the members of the Women Leading the Way Steering Committee. And those are Cece Baptiste, Beth Bilson, Charmaine Wintermute, Tanya Hudson, and Joanne Paulson. They worked in a very creative, I think, and innovative way to bring this discussion together, and we all want to thank them for that. I want to thank each of you today, and especially those of you who have been able to remain in the meeting, for carving out the time to learn from our panelists and learn a little bit, at least through the Q&A and the chat, from each other about how we're feeling, how we're thinking, what we've learned, and what sorts of things can change. And speaking of the chat box, it's my understanding that today's door prize winner should be appearing there. Okay, Rochelle Mancier is a door prize winner, so congratulations to Rochelle. And you know, I want to do one final poll for those of you left here in this meeting. I want to do one final poll before we say goodbye, because I thought that first one was interesting. So once again, get to that chat box on your screen, go to that link, slido.com, click on that link. Remember, our event code is WLTW. Now, here's the polling question. In one word, name a strength, a capability, or an asset you can bring to your community to build the kind of connections that are going to be necessary for us to keep moving forward as a community. One word, don't overthink it. A strength, a capability, or an asset you can bring. We've all got something we can give. We've all got something we can give. Look at that. That's very powerful. That's very powerful. You look at one of the most important thing we can give is our time and of ourselves, and to share compassion. You know, when I get up in the morning, there's 4 things I ask of myself every morning. I say I want to exhibit strength, courage, wisdom, and humility. And if at some point in that day I can exhibit those things and those things are gifted to me, that's a pretty good day right there. And what I think we're seeing here is that in a time like this, if we can exhibit compassion, if we can give the gift of our time, if we can have courage and we can make our voice heard and also help others make their voices heard, that's going to be a good day right there. And that's going to allow us to move into this recovery mode and to take what we've learned and to change some things. And I think that's what we're all here for, is to be able to make some change. So I want to thank everybody. It's been an honor to be in this room with you today, in this virtual room. Especially want to thank those of you who are United Way Leader donors, many of you on the call today, and bringing sort of your local love to the community in so many different ways, and having that significant impact on those unignorable issues. Let's find a way to stay connected, even when we're apart, and really hoping, fingers crossed, that next time we meet next year at this time, we can all be together in a very different and powerful way. Thanks all of you for bringing your genuine selves to this discussion, and I hope you have a good day.